Cheers.
Cheers. Hello, and welcome to TalkieTime. I am your host, Marcus Smith, and today I will be interviewing Angel Santiago.
Thank you for having me.
You were very welcome. You wanted to start at 10.
Yeah.
So, start me off there. What kind of was going on at that time, and how does that fit into kind of how you think about yourself now?
Well, I feel like at 10 years old, I kind of think of my life decade by decade, right? Like if you go from 10, you're a person then, 20, now I'm rolling into like 30, right? I'm 27, right? But I feel like at 10, it's a good starting point because it was at the point where I started questioning my own existence, you know what I mean, right? Because I feel like as a kid, you just go, you have fun, people know your name, to go frolic or do whatever. You deal with bullies and stuff, but for the most part, you don't have any solid sense of identity, right?
So at 10 years old, you didn't have any kind of stable or consistent friends, is that the case?
No, not really. I didn't have stable or consistent anything really. You know what I mean? It was just like being told to do things and doing them, which I guess every kid does, but like really not having any sense of personal autonomy outside of like, I grew up as an only child too. Okay. So a lot of times, like for me to stay occupied, because my mom's always working, you know what I mean? Normally my grandparents would babysit me here and there, but there's like way too much of a gap to have like any meaningful sense of like social interaction, with people your age, right? So I just normally just stayed cooped up, like reading books, playing video games, all these different things, and like expanding my imagination, and I think that's where it began for me trying to figure out, like, I'm reading about all these heroes and like adventures and all these different environments, but like what does that mean for my life, like who am I in my story, and at that point, like, I didn't feel like anybody, and that's kind of tough feeling to have. So I think the one big win I had around that age was like 5th grade spelling bee, right? That was like the first memory I have where I feel like I won at something, anything, because, I grew up, I still have horrible chronic asthma, but at that point in time, my asthma was infinitely worse, you're on the playground and I couldn't be athletic, and I remember, other times in the gym, we're doing the mile, and I'm the last person, like huffing and puffing, and like I remember racing with like other kids, and then being like super last place, like it wasn't even close, and like kids are like competitions like that. So I didn't have a lot of instances growing up in which I won. You know what I mean? I didn't really have a lot of people telling me I could win. 5th grade spelling bee was really cool because you have all these kids across all the different classes. Right, it's in front of like in the assembly room or whatever, in the cafeteria, and it was probably the first instance in where I felt like I shouldn't have won. Actually, there's a lot of instances in where I felt like I shouldn't have won. I was like the underdog, and in that case, I really was. You know what I mean? Nobody really saw me as like smart or I should have won the spelling bee. You know what I'm saying? But I did, which was cool because out of all these kids, and then you have like the smart kids. Who are also like, like people know they're smart, like they get good grades, whatever. And then there was just me, like on the stage. The word I won on was pumpernickel.
Really?
Like clear as day. Like, it was like, this is like Rocky, Apollo Creed, like, 14th round, right? Like I'm bloody, like, make it work. And, I remember getting to the end of that word, I knew I won. Yeah. Like when I heard pumpernickel, the other kids were out, I was like, this is it, this is my moment. And it was super cool to like win and just feel like I earned it. Like, like I don't know if I was expected to win, it didn't matter. Like I flexed my skills. Yeah. I won, and being recognized for that was really awesome for someone who didn't have situations like that for a decade of their existence,
Can I ask, can you still spell pumpernickel from memory?
Yeah.
Because I cannot.
No, it's Pumpernickel. Pumpernickel.
Wow, yeah. There you have it. I cannot do that. So it sounds like we have this background of, in some ways, a medical kind of condition has influenced your social environment. Are there any other influences on your social environment that you want to dive into? Elsewise, we'll move to the next kind of question I have for you.
Yeah, I mean, medical things like asthma on the record, like, I've struggled with like ADHD. That was off the record, especially in the early 2000s. Like, mental health wasn't taken nearly as seriously as it was now. So I was just like stupid hyperactive, like, and I struggled with other like mental health disorders as well that weren't diagnosed for a while. So for the most part, I think I was like driving a bicycle with no brakes and like shoddy tires and expected to just make it to the finish line like anybody else who had like normal functional bikes. The bike of my body, I was running on like spare parts, what I mean? And it made it difficult to feel equal in a lot of ways to others when nobody could help advocate like for my problems that I had or like issues that I had that I could kind of verbalize, but nobody put a name on it. Nobody put a name on it. It didn't exist back then. And then just being expected to still perform at the same level as other people. Like, and I think for somebody my age at the time, like that was a very big stressor for like a long time to feel adequate or like feeling like I was worthy of like love or anything, you know what I mean?
So moving on then, we have this kind of this setup, and then you wanted to talk about you kind of maybe you could frame it how you want, but I'm going to say you found a way to kind of deal with this turbulence that you felt from being a little different, and you kind of leaned into maybe some like a rugged individualism around like 18. So help me kind of understand, what did going into that look like? Was it kind of like a gradual transition, or did you just have like a aha moment, or tell me a little bit about that?
So from like 10 onwards, 10, 11, like elementary school, you go into middle school, and everyone's changing in like a myriad of ways, not just physically, mentally, right? You're expanding your social circles or whatever, and people are starting to kind of like identify with things they do or, music they listen to, and then you have like the stereotypes of like jocks and, cheerleaders and theater kids, what have you, right? Like, a lot of how we build our identities are like the things we choose to do and like the groups we surround ourselves with, so about that point in time, I had to deal with like a lot of bullying, and it was pretty difficult because getting bullied just sucks. And when you understand why you're getting bullied, it sucks even more. And when you feel like you don't have the autonomy to fix the things you're being bullied for, it's like a triple threat of like existence is pain as a young, like 12, 13-year-old or whatever. But I feel like around that time, I also had to be introspective, like, there was something that I read when I was going to church with my grandmother, because she was like super spiritual and religious, like a Christian, you know what I mean? Closest thing to a saint I feel like anybody could meet in real life, But there was a part in the Bible that I read, and it had to do with Jesus, like eating or sitting at a table with like prostitutes and tax collectors and invalids and other people nobody wanted to be around, like the lepers and like people didn't take showers enough or whatever, jokes aside. And the Pharisees being like, we finally got him, because they were always trying to catch Jesus in something. They were always trying to figure out like a hole in how he, functioned and like spread the gospel, right? And Jesus said, basically, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick, right? So it really resonated with me reading that, out of reading the entire Bible when I was younger for a challenge to win a piggy bank, which it wasn't really worth it. But I'm glad I did that challenge, because it made me read that passage and it like flipped. Like, I feel like there's been a lot of instances in my life where I call it like a switch flip, right? Like in my brain was a permanent like moment of lucidity or something like this makes sense. Like this objectively in my life is something I want to carry forward. So I made it a point to be as understanding as possible for somebody my age, with like anybody I met. So sporty people, nerdy people, dorky people, kids that did drugs, kids who like would never touch drugs in their lives. It didn't matter. Like for me, it was just trying to understand like other people, you know, and still within the framework of being like a preteen, you know what I mean? Because we're all idiots at that age, like just being varying levels of irresponsible and pushing limits. But in any case, it was enlightening to me because, you know, after getting bullied or whatever, I ended up having like a lot of good, I'd say acquaintances at the time, you know what I mean? Like friends, right? Like people I knew in passing, people I knew by name, and, you know, people, I guess, being excited to see me, mostly because I was just excited to like talk to other people and like learn more about them, you know, and making people feel included. Because I'd never felt like included when I was younger, I guess. So I wanted to make sure everybody else was. But, you know, even going through that, going into like the high school era, I feel like that was sort of like my dark night of the soul, if you ever heard that expression. Like it was, you know, you get out of middle school is cool, but then, you know, you get to high school and that's the moment where you're on like on a ticking time bomb of like, what do you do? You know, like freshman year, it's like you're still kind of like, you know, whatever, I'm going to play sports, blah, 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 you know. And the sophomore year is a bit the same. Junior and senior year is when everyone's saying, like, are you going to go to school? Are you going to go into the workforce? What are your plans after high school? Do you have plans, you know? And that was a big stressor for me because at this point, like, I had a bunch of people who were pretty excited that I existed, which was cool, but I still didn't have, like, that identity I was looking for, you know what I mean? I just felt like a chameleon. You know, and I still didn't feel good at anything, you know what I mean? And at that point, like, it was really difficult to see other people be successful at anything, and I was always, like, below mediocre in just about anything I tried to do, you know? And I feel like I didn't have the support from anybody at the time to, like, push the limit, you know what I mean? So, a lot of times it was a lot of doubt, like, are you sure you can do this? Are you sure you can do that, you know? How are you going to perform in this? Like, maybe you should rethink that. You know, I did sports, I wrestled, and got my ass kicked for like 2 years. And then junior and senior year, I performed a lot better, but I still wasn't the best. I got a lot out of it, you know, but I was never top performer in anything. So junior year, like, I was like super low. It was like one of the lowest points of my life. And I was, you know, to put it lightly, I tried to, you know, shuffle myself off the Nordic coil, so to speak. And that was like the prelude to better things to come. I'm glad I went through that experience, to be honest with you. It sounds weird, but yeah.
And then, do you want to dig into that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned, it sounded like you considered killing yourself.
Yeah.
And then you said you're glad that you went through that.
Yeah.
Help maybe, or what made you kind of come to that perspective?
I guess just like looking back in time, you know, like looking back on it, you know, in the moment it really sucked. Like it was just like a complete and total catastrophic existential crisis to someone who's like 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how early you can have a midlife crisis, but that was it. Like I was having like, you know, I'm not good at anything. Like, I can't get respect for anything I want to do or that I'm good at, and you know, I don't have any avenues to like figure out how to get good at things. You know.
So it felt like you didn't have a future.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like it just felt like it was like what would Angel do like after school, graduate and go work at like Hardee's or something. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what I wanted to do. Basically, like that was the problem. Is that I wanted to do a lot of cool big things, and I felt like I didn't have the support or the I didn't have the support. I didn't have like the coaching or mentoring, and I didn't have the resources to do it. So there was no framework for me to be like, with even, because you see people who, they have both their parents, right, and like they have like at least some money saved up, and they're the kids who are like, I don't know if I'm gonna get into the school, even though like I have a 95.56 and like my grades are basically perfect. Like they're worrying, but there's a framework there. They have they have the resources, the mentorship, the support from the parents, the like sort of roadmap, so to speak, if they wanted to go that avenue. Like for me, there was no map,
Right.
and there was no like paper to even make a makeshift map on. You know what I mean? And there was no idea of like where the map would go. That's how like aimless I felt at that point in my life. You know what I mean?
So you're at this point in your life where you're like, there's no future. I don't have the resources or the roadmap or the framework to kind of move forward. But then you've mentioned that since then you look back on that with some perspective. What's the perspective that kind of you look back on that, or how do you understand that moment in time now?
Yeah, so the way I understand it is that, life has lots of ebbs and flows. Like I wouldn't have went on like the journey of self-discovery I tried to put myself through without hitting absolute rock bottom at 16, 17. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I was actively telling people, ultimately, like, I would love to just not exist. Like, I don't want to hurt my mom's feelings or my family's feelings, but I really logicked it out. I was like, you know what? After, like, maybe a week and a half, I was kind of, like, morbidly funny about it. I was like, people, like, kind of just, they'll do, like, I don't even know what the word is, like, the whole, like, in memoriam, like, a weird picture of me or whatever. In 2 weeks, like, everybody's gonna, just go on with it, and everybody will be happy, and I'll be the happiest because I'm not here anymore, laughing, right?
You gotta find a way to communicate it. Like those feelings, and they exist, and they're hitting you, and if you're around people, it's like you want people to understand your situation, and it's like humor, one of its amazing qualities is it allows us to talk about really crappy and uncomfortable things in a public setting. And so it sounds like you used humor as a way to be like, hey, life sucks, here's where I'm at, and then to kind of get that out. But it sounds like the perspective that you look back at now with is this idea of like, you saw how low things can get, but you've since come to see that as life ebbs and flows. It's okay.
Yeah.
And to not let to not let yourself stay there. Is that kind of how you think about it?
100%. It was, to not be long-winded, it was the point in time where I felt like I needed to justify my existence. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Like that was the point in time where it was do or die, back against the wall, literally. Like it was like very primal sense of like needing to justify my existence. I don't know if that makes sense to a lot of people. It's like, why did you buy this car? And you can explain like, because it was blue and because it goes fast, or why did you get this meal? Because my mom, it's kind of like what my mom made way back when, and I like the flavors of like the corn or the carrots, whatever. You can justify a lot of things in life. You justify maybe somebody that you end up wanting to spend the rest of your life with. Like, I'm in love with my boyfriend, I want to marry him because he's kind, he's funny, you know what I mean? We have similar interests. Like, that was me with my life. I had no justifications to exist at that point. So it was like, I need to make ways to like, make it make sense for me to exist, basically. So that was like the prelude to when I feel like I really took a big dive into a lot of cool stuff, or made a lot of big life decisions that led me here. But I wouldn't have been able to start like having those like blips of lucidity without like that whole situation.
Yeah, so it sounds like you use that as the diving board into that individualism that we talked about a second ago.
Yeah.
So walk me into that. You went from low point to trying to find something.
Yeah.
What did you find, and what did that look like for you at the time?
So, very cliche, but obviously after you like try to kill yourself and then you fail and you feel like even more of a weenie because you couldn't like send it 100%, you get put in suicide prevention counseling, whatever. Once you do all of that and you get out and you're free and it helps, you're still tasked with like, okay, what am I doing?
Yep.
So for me, I think at that point, as a wee lad, we all want to know what the meaning of life is. So it sounds stupid thinking about it now, but way back then I was like, somebody has to know like why people just decide not to die, you know what I mean? And it was funny thinking about it because Albert Camus had allegedly said something, right? Like, he said, should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? And his whole actual on the record thing was like, you know, the most important question a human being can have is whether or not to kill themselves. Precisely because you have to make life make sense to do anything else. Like before we talk about, you know, what is good and evil, you know, what is love, you know, these philosophical questions. For anybody to even get there, why live? Because if you don't want to live or there's no real reason to live, all of that doesn't matter. So for me in my brain, it was starting at that point of like, what is it? You know, and I read books by like Friedrich Nietzsche at the time, a lot of existentialist like authors, you know what I mean? And I read about like Machiavelli, and it was pretty interesting because he had a more like realistic approach to how the world worked. And
this was, just to clarify, this was around the time you were 18.
This was before 18, almost 18, like after my whole like depressive spell, suicide spell.
Okay.
Yeah, coming out of it, like trying to figure out, you know, like, and again, at the time ingesting a lot of different ideas that I'd never exposed myself to. I think that was the cool thing about the internet at the time, is that for the most part, there was a lot of good information and wisdom from like dead people that they wrote it down and they're pretty well known that you could get for free. So it was like downloading a bunch of ebooks and PDFs. Because like, you know, I just
the idea of going and reading Nietzsche and these kind of existentialist authors, I think at 17, for many people is probably surprising. I think from what I know of you, it makes a lot of sense given the place that you're at, but it also, just me knowing you, and I know not everyone in the audience will, but me knowing you helps me understand you a lot, because I'm like, you've always presented as this very intellectual and philosophically oriented, and maybe a tad, or I don't know how much you identify with spiritual, but that too.
yeah.
And if you're engrossed in the topic at this level, because it's, to you, this is literally, should I be here? What does it mean? And this is deeply integral to kind of your own understanding of yourself.
Oh yeah. I mean, I tell people like I had to do it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, you know, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? Like, you know, I'll just read Nietzsche because it's interesting. Like I everything I did to like justify my existence, it had to be done.
Yeah. That's
how severe it was in my mind. Like from that point forward, any goal I set, that was like the beginning, like making it make sense, right? Like, if it helped me make more sense of myself and why I should stick around, like it had to be done. There was no like choice behind it. There was no like not finishing the book, not getting something out of it. Like it was all had, and nobody had a gun held in my head. Not my parents, you know, not my friends, not my teachers. Like nobody's forcing me to read philosophy books. I had to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To just want to keep going, right?
So I completely understand.
Yeah.
I think for me, I went into psychology for the same reason. I'm sitting, you know, reading family psychology, family dynamics, conflict, and all this stuff. And for me, it was like, there has to be a better answer. And if I can read it and understand it, then that's going to help me. So I think part of what I'm interested in we'll skip this if it's not as interesting to you, but I imagine that going through all of this kind of brought you to a level of, I'm not sure the best way to describe it, but let's just say like it brought you to an extremely close level of maybe the other side of reality, to where you're considering life at a much more existential level than your peers for someone who's 17, 18 years old. I can see how it might be difficult to relate to other people around your age who are like, what college should I go to? What major should I pick? When you're like, should I be alive?
Yeah.
How, kind of what happened next? What did your social life look like? What did things, or for you it was like, let me find an identity and I don't care about anything else right now?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, how do I describe it? At that point, like for background, like I feel like at that point in time I was pretty well connected with most people, you know what I mean? Like, I was known as a pretty jovial guy, you know what I mean? Peacekeeper, right? Like, connector, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't really good at anything, so a lot of times I just had to lean on being like funny and energetic, and that's just like
Exhausting.
it was exhausting, and a lot of times I didn't feel respected, you know what I mean? And obviously, honestly, like, you have to respect yourself before you can get respect from anybody. I remember there was a wrestling coach that I had. A lot of my wrestling coaches were like mental and spiritual, like, senseis to me, you know what I mean? But it was like earlier on when I started wrestling, I was like just getting mangled by everybody, He looked at me and he's like, Angel, try to like put your head up, you know what I mean? Like stand tall, put your shoulders back, And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you should walk with some sense of confidence, like you're doing this sport or whatever. I didn't know what confidence meant, you know what I mean? But I look back and I can almost like third person see myself, and I could see like just how like downtrodden I probably looked, like just getting mangled every day. The whole like outside of me wrestling, I wasn't good at like anything else. It was just, I think me doing it, like nobody forced me to do that sport. It's the hardest sport in the world. But almost like a tap on the shoulder, like I could have quit at any time. I spent 2 years not winning a single match, right? But I couldn't quit, you know what I mean? The easiest sport to quit. There are so many, I think out of all the people that started on the team when I was a freshman, right? Like, by the end of it, by the time we were all seniors, only 3 or 4 of us kept on, you know what I mean? And I was like the least expected to do that, right? So, that respect, the confidence, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, it was, I think it was like 17, building up to that, right? Like, it was finally the breaking point for so much, you know what I mean? Like, I learned a lot. Like, I started to feel like living was not sucky anymore, like, things lined up, like, there were little tastes. There's just a book I read that basically, if you set out for any goal, it says that, the universe gives you beginner's luck, right? To give you a taste of, like, what you're chasing after. And I think, from 17, getting to 18, I had a lot of taste of, like, a lot of cool things. I'm starting to feel like I'm winning a little bit, like, little victories, and, I'm starting to feel like I'm coming into my own. And it was, like, around that point where, like, the identity thing, like, just snapped into place, Because I know you mentioned, like, having the conversations, are you going to school, college, hearing everybody else. I didn't really ask those questions, but this was like the boiling point at which, like, I didn't care if anybody asked me those questions. You know what I mean? Right? So, anyways, that's like the prelude before, like, I feel like the main act of the hero's journey, right? We're going to roll into.
Let's just dive into it. You've set it up perfectly. I don't even need to ask a question.
Alrighty, man. Well, it was the week of, graduation, right? High school. And I remember waking up one morning in a cold sweat. I'm not even kidding you. Like, out of bed, like, I saw a ghost or whatever, like a night terror, and the sun was coming through the window, like a very clear memory, like, I just jumped out of bed, and the first thing I said to myself was, what the F am I going to do with my life? Genuinely said it to myself. Like, I was shivering, like I had the flu, and I didn't. But it was like a very, like, snap moment. Like, I haven't woken up with that much, like, excitement and fear in, like, a long time,
Yeah.
Like, even when you forget to set your alarm and you wake up and you realize you're super late for work or whatever, like, this is beyond that. This is like figuring out you might be late to, like, the biggest moments of your life for me. So, anyways, at that point in time, like I said, it was like a huge epiphany in the sense that very clearly in my mind, I saw, like, 2 different paths, right? I saw a path where I just kept being complacent, doing, like, what I was doing, which wasn't really much. It was, like, hanging out with a few close friends, kind of just bouncing from group to group of people, not having, like, a clear sense of identity still, and kind of just going through life and still really being told, like, what to do and, like, where to go. If it wasn't by, like, my parents or, like, coaches or, like, teachers, right? It was by friends, like, hey, do this, do that, come do this, whatever. You know what I mean? There was no like me making choices for myself.
Sure.
There was that whole path, and admittedly it made me really depressed because that's where I was, and it was just like
the path of following other people's
Yeah.
prescribed kind of next steps.
100%. And if, you know, if people said like I couldn't do this, couldn't do that, that was just life for me. And then I got to be 80, stuck in my hometown, and die of like, I don't know, asthma, like probably, you know, or like eating too many donuts. I don't know. That's what it was. And then like in my brain, I was like, that can't do that, you know.
Right.
But I saw an alternate path for my life, and this is like at 18 after like jumping out of bed, like it was like very clear.
Sure.
And it was that I just stopped listening to everybody, and Angel would do what Angel wanted to do, and if Angel wanted to go to big boy college at Virginia Tech, he just did that, and if he didn't have the resources to do that, he found a way. And if people said Angel couldn't do that, Angel said thanks, but your opinion is meaningless. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it
Right.
with everything. And it was that moment. It was like the Angel that woke up that morning was like a big switch flipped, right? Like it was, if you wouldn't recognize me that morning and the day before, dude. Like 100%. Like something like visceral just switched.
In that moment, this is a little off topic if you don't mind a tangent. I sometimes experience these moments where it's like reality becomes realer than real.
Yeah.
And it's like when you're in that moment, it's like it's almost like you feel like connected to something much bigger, and you like can feel and sense. It's almost like you can sense kind of like the future or know what's about to happen, but at the same time you have this intensely real experience of your current moment. Do you relate to that description?
100%. It's just like it's a weird, like, crazy presentness, you know? Like, somebody who's, you know, at the time, I was like pretty super duper atheist, but at 18, thinking about it, right? Like, because when you're like super depressed, it's really hard to believe God exists, because like life is pain. But coming out of that and feeling relatively contented with my life at that point, I sort of had a lot of intuitive realizations. One of them, to your point, like talking about being super present, was that, you know, the universe, being as big as it was, sort of has like a vibe or whatever, you know? And I think there are certain moments or situations where everybody can sort of like lean in on that vibe or feel that vibe. And like if you're able to feel that vibe, and it sounds like pretty, you know, stonery or whatever you want to call it, like trippy, you know what I mean? In my mind, it just made sense that, you know, God maybe isn't some dude in the sky. Maybe God is like everything that is, right? And that if in some ways we could kind of like lean into it or feel it, you know, it could give us guidance or realizations that we wouldn't be able to have if we just operated our life on a very physical level, you know, which I feel like, well, it's easy to do that. So.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to and understand what you mean.
Yeah.
So, to bring back into kind of your personal narrative, you wake up this morning, you have the sense of like, I'm going to be me, regardless of what other people think. And from there, how did that change your interactions and your perspective? Was that a period of time where you just kind of like felt good about things, or where you felt stable? And then I know a little bit of foreshadowing that you want to kind of talk about, you've since modified that perspective, but give us a sense of what it was like living in that and kind of how long you were there.
Yeah, so what I noticed about personal interactions, you know, I should make it a point, right? I love my family to death. My mom specifically, the hardest working human being that could have ever existed, like the most powerful woman in the world. You know what I mean? She was always busy trying to not just take care of me, but other family members who fell in hard times.
Sure.
She was always busy, you know, trying to take care of my grandparents who helped take care of me, but they were older, you know what I mean? And, you know, they had like certain disabilities and stuff and made it difficult, you know. And it was my mom holding the world on her back and then some, you know. I was blessed enough, like at a certain point in time, that my mom got remarried. And, you know, my stepdad, right, like at the beginning we butted heads because that's just what stepchildren and stepparents do. But ultimately, you know, he became like the father figure I really needed in life that I didn't have, you know, in some roundabout way. So everything really came together in a lot of cool ways. But with that being said, personally, like I feel like I didn't ever have like that like a deep enough connection with my parents where, that's since changed. But around that point in time, I feel like they didn't really understand how like weird I was. You know what I'm saying? And like how like just not knowing of what I want to do was, and like trying to get support for things and like really needing that like support that's like you can do it no matter what. You know what I mean? I wasn't getting that from like anybody, except for like a few choice people. But in any case, yeah, around that time, right, like I was a lot more just I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and if that's not a part of the plan, then I just don't care. So like for example, if like somebody's like, hey, we're gonna go drink at somebody's house on like Friday night, and I wanted to like take notes on a book or something. I was trying to like teach myself a bunch of stuff, you know what I mean? I just say, yeah, just thanks for the invite. I don't want to do that, I'll be busy. You know what I mean? And it was a lot of like that. There were a lot of situations where it was like, what does Angel want to do? And it was normally like read books and take notes and learn as much as I could about everything to like continue figuring out why existing makes sense to me personally, among other things, and just wanting to learn, and then, like going on hikes or hitting the driving range, just doing things I wanted to do, and a lot of times it was just doing things alone, and it was really rewarding because I felt like empowered by not needing to be with anybody to enjoy things, like going to new restaurants on my own.
Right.
It was like, it never felt lonely. It just felt like I finally had the freedom to, when I made a decision, I did it, like I executed on it,
And to contrast that, you talked about kind of like in middle school, high school, you were in these groups but never felt respected.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like in order to exist in those groups, you acted as a chameleon where you would, I'll be funny, I'll use my energy to elevate the mood in the group, I'll do this, I'll do that. And so it sounds like up until this point, your energy has always been directed at assisting or benefiting others, and rarely, up until this point, had your energy been spent on you. And then it sounds like you broke away from that, and you're like, I am spending my energy on me, regardless of what other people think and feel, and then kind of reclaiming that for yourself felt awesome, felt peaceful, felt
empowering. Yeah, it was peaceful, empowering, and like, I feel like when I had a lot of these like firm goals that I wanted to hit, because everything was like pull up by your bootstraps, you know what I mean? Like, I tell people my mom worked as hard as she did to just give me the opportunity to where if I worked myself to the bone and like to the depths of my soul, like if I put all my chips on the table is how I described it, right? Like a gambit, you know what I mean? All the chips got pushed to the center of the table, and this is your final gamble, right? If I did that and it came up aces for me, I'd get to where I wanted to be. That's how it was. So like I'm very thankful for my mom and my parents and like how much work they put in my family, you know what I mean? So that was another thing, big driver for me was like, if they did so much, you know what I mean? All my family, and like, I was like one of the first people in my family to go to school, right? If they did so much for me to even have that drop of opportunity, I had to take that drop through like the desert. And nurse that drop of substance, whatever, and make it to the other side no matter what, and like figure out how to get from point A to point B. So, I felt like I started getting a lot more respect because people just saw that I was driven. You know what I mean? It was like borderline maniacal about doing things that I wanted to do, and like ultimately, like put myself through community college because I couldn't like go straight to big boy school because money. And I was working like 40, 50, 60 hours a week to make enough scratch, like pay for books and like cover what, FAFSA wouldn't, and like all this stuff and paying for classes. That was already enough, but I told you I had to do it. So that's where like I felt pushing myself to the absolute limit, which is not healthy for anybody. That will go further in this conversation, right? At that point in time, it's like let's say you have to breathe, right? Like unless you hold your breath, your body will force you to breathe.
Right.
Unless you like hold your eyes open, your body will force you to blink. You can't stop your heart, is what that level had to do, felt like. So if I was like getting, 2 or 3 hours of sleep and putting myself through classes and stuff, like it didn't matter. Like it was just beyond any, like, if I had to run my body to the ground, as long as I got what I needed to get, like, it was worth it.
During that time, did you feel like you were kind of like almost like automated, or did you feel like you were constantly like making decisions and making choices?
Yeah, no, I felt like I had a lot of decisions to make, and honestly, like, I would say, 18, 19, 20, a bit of 21, I just, I felt like a superhero. I relished in wanting to be a superhero. You know what I mean? Like, saves the day. You know what I mean? Knows enough to help people out, right? Anybody has an issue, you come to Angel, Angel solves it, right? Like, I loved that feeling. But there were certain situations and people and conversations I had to have, not just my family, but, relationships with others, friends, where telling people who said they cared about me in confidence, like, I can't be the superhero all the time. At this point, like, I was hitting so many of my goals and stuff, like doing a bunch of cool things, and like if I said I was gonna do something, I did it, you know what I mean? And it was just like super empowering. Like there are a lot of times where I just got overwhelmed, and I had to tell people close to me who couldn't maybe understand how busy I was and driven I was, to just let them know like I can't be Superman all the time. Like you gotta give me at least like an hour once a week to be Clark Kent and vulnerable, and it was like a different side of the coin. Like at that point in time, I felt like I came to realize, and it was like a big like drift for me personally of like a lot of people liked me because I was just doing badass things, and like obviously you see like athletes and other like people who are doing big things, right? Like they get lots of respect and stuff. I feel like I had that, like I had like that power of just being good at things now, like finding good at a lot of things and finding a way to be good at things. But in terms of like core me, my core, like what makes me, I feel like that never got a lot of leeway, when I was transparent with people and open.
So it sounds like you're at this point starting to maybe find your limits, or at the very least express your limits to other people. I can't be Superman all the time. I need to spend energy on me.
Yeah.
And we let's lead it to kind of the last point that we wanted to talk about. So we talked about kind of finding out who you are, and we talked about, it sounds like you found some success and set some personal goals, boundaries, pushed yourself, started to set limits with other people. But then it's at some point you mentioned kind of this change of, hey, I also have to let people in.
Yeah.
Where did that come?
So this is probably about the point in time I could put a name to my identity. You know what I mean? I feel like from 18 all the way up to about 21, 22, like the identity was set. You know what I mean? Like I was very much, I do things because I want to do them. I like helping people out, but ultimately, like I'm person driven by goals. I'm going to do A, B, and C. Yeah. And at this point in time, when I could put a name to it, like I had done so many of those things. You know what I mean? Like without fail. So, I sort of got into like a cowboy aesthetic, and I really resonated philosophically with like what a cowboy is. You know what I mean? Like you're exploring uncharted territory. And like you're out in the West, and you're eating beans out of a can, right? Like sometimes you meet outlaws. You're like trying to save, you're trying to save your own life, and you gotta pull out your revolver and tell the sheriff, right? Like there ain't enough room in this town for the two of us, right? Sure. So that's what it was, and that's what I really leaned into, and how I saw myself as like that cowboy, right? Man with no name, from the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like going from town to town, like solving issues for people, and he's sort of enigmatic and aloof, you know what I mean? And it was just like at that point in time I started getting so busy. That's really what I was. Like I was just purely the identity like moving along, like a lingering will of trying to finally get to the end game of me being here, right? But I went through some hard times during that period, like really hard, where I really was just sort of out of gas. Like I was all gas, no brakes, to where like there was no brakes left to even use, if that makes sense. Like all gas, no brakes, but now there were no brakes, hypothetically. Like if you needed to stop it, like I was, for better or worse, like unstoppable. I like had like multiple mental breakdowns. Another dark moment in my life, right? And it was around the time that I had to realize that you can't be the lone cowboy all the time. Even if I had goals, even if Angel wanted to do this and nobody else wanted to do it, or whatever, even if I couldn't like jive with other people around me, even if people like liked me or whatever, because I was the superhero, and in my brain, like that's all that mattered at that point, and it breaks my heart, man, because I had a lot of good like friendships and stuff, and a lot of people that did care about me, not just because I was kicking butt and I was the cowboy and the superhero, right? They like taking it back to what I mentioned way earlier, the whole thing about Jesus, the tax collectors, the invalids, whatever. Like people didn't like me necessarily because I was doing cool stuff. They liked me because I liked them, because I enjoyed being around people and making people feel important. And I really lost that at that period of time. And one big thing that I've had to learn, or good advice that I got recently from a friend, was to just be uncomfortable and be more open with people again. You know what I mean? Like at this point, I'm not away at war anymore. Like my hero's journey, or that hero's journey, is done, well concluded. I hit every single goal I set, right? I'm living where I want to live. Like I went to school at the only place I put an application for, because that's where I want to go to school. Like I wrote a book, I won a gold medal state tournament in judo. Like any goal I hit is done, set in stone in the past. But having those hard conversations with a friend, ultimately she was right. Like you can't constantly be stuck on your past. Like I said, everyone's identity, personality, or whatever, no matter how static you think it is, no matter how much you feel like you finally figured it out and this is you forever, no matter how confident you feel about that, right?
Do you remember the kind of conversation that opened up that perspective for you? And are you comfortable kind of relaying it?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it was just sometimes you need people to vibe check it, or give you a reality check, or like help you see blind spots in who you are, you know what I mean? It was just like a really like transparent conversation with me. It was just like, maybe you should consider things this way, maybe you should consider things that way, or like, the biggest thing was just being like more just open. Like somebody cares about me, they want to know things about me, you know what I mean? I don't have to be like super secretive about things, like people are invested in like me, and if I want to learn more about them, right, they should want to learn more about me too, like if they want to do that, if I want to spend time with somebody, like by the same stroke, like I need to also invest in those relationships. Like, I don't have to be enigmatic or aloof, or like, constantly kind of trying to be some sort of hermit, right? So that's pretty enlightening. That was probably like the most recent switch to flip, right? I think what really closes it out of a couple things, and where I feel like where I'm at, and things that I want to do as more like life resolutions. We're at the new year, but life resolutions. There was Peter Cullen, who was the guy that voiced Optimus Prime, and for whatever reason, I just wanted to know more about him. So
because he has a great voice.
He does have a great voice, and the interesting thing is I'm going to tell you the origin of how he came to that voice, right? Because it put me in tears. Peter Cullen was going to an interview for the role of Optimus Prime, right? And his brother at the time, I think his brother was like a military guy, asked him like, "Hey Peter, what are you going to do?" And like Peter was like, "Hey, I'm going to audition for this like cartoon or whatever. it's going to be like this truck that can transform, and but believe it or not, he's not just going to be like a truck. He's going to be a hero truck. You know what I mean? And his brother told him, right, like I'm sure they laughed about it a little bit. His brother said, Peter, if you're going to be a hero, be a real hero. Don't be one of those types of guys that are loud, like bombastic, boisterous, hamming it up, right? It's like we see heroes in movies do. He said, be a real hero, right? Be strong enough to be gentle, is what he said, right? And that's how Peter Cole came up with the voice of Optimus Prime, like my name is Optimus Prime, like really deep, respectable, you know what I mean? Like warm, but like courageous and confident, right?
Kind of like confident but understated.
Yeah. And it hit me like a truck because I was definitely the voice that Peter's brother was saying not to be when I was younger. Like I was obsessed with being a superhero, you know what I mean? And I wasn't enough of the hero. So that's been like a big focus. It's like, how can I be the hero? How can I genuinely help people out? You know what I mean? How can I be a hero in the lives of others rather than constantly trying to be the goal post passer or whatever?
Yeah. I think of it in terms of like it's so when I was 13, I got a hold of this book, and it was called Boundaries by a clinical psychologist who focused on family, and it kind of rocked my world. But some of the framework that he uses is like, if your boundaries are too wide, you're considering everybody else's feelings and emotions, and you're probably not considering your own enough.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you kind of started there, where it's like you're trying to fit in, you're trying to take care of other people, you're trying to help, and then you went, your boundaries went from really, really broad to super small, focused on just you.
Yeah.
And that gave you a different perspective, because now all of a sudden everybody's like, whoa, Angel's really like zoned in and figured out what he's doing with his life. And then that brings its own kind of people who are seeking your energy, because you look like you figured it out and you have energy to spend on other people now. And then it sounds like you've kind of since then realized, okay, well, if I'm too wrapped up in focusing on complete control of my iron castle, it makes it hard to connect with others. And so then you had to kind of let it back out a little bit again and say, okay, I still need to focus on myself, I still need to understand myself, but I also realize that I have to let other people in if I want to connect and be a part of like a friendship or a community or something like that.
100%. Yeah, it was understanding that there's a golden mean to everything, right? Like someone who's always lived a life of extremes, so on and so forth, right? I think with a lot of conclusions I came to, circular reason might mean something else, but to me, circular reasoning was thinking of like all these ideas and concepts. It's like on a circle, right? And you have like one extreme here, which is normally where I was starting at, where I was firmly like, this is what it is. And then on the bottom, you have the opposite extreme, right? And I would try to go from one side of the circle to the other, right? So you start here and you force yourself to get to the opposite and learn about it and really internalize it. And then you go from that opposite back to where you started. And most of the time, you become more well-balanced. That was my most recent thing. It was like, you can't be so caught up in yourself, right? On things that you think people care about, and things that you care about, getting from point A to point B, without losing like a lot of the sweet things that people that life has to offer. But by the same stroke, if you're so busy, focused on what everybody else is doing and trying to be too involved and being very lackadaisical with what you want to do, you know what I mean? Like, you also lose a lot of what is personally enriching, right? So ultimately you just gotta strike the balance, right? It's just what life is.
Love that.
Yeah.
Well, Angel, thank you very much. This has been a talkie time with Marcus and Angel. Thank you very much again.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you next time.